Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Hello and welcome to Ymedia Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and India has been making news and its rounds in terms of some of the agreements it's putting into place. And the latest one is that India and 5 Nordic nations have elevated their relations into what the leaders are now calling a green technology innovation strategic partnership during a major summit in Oslo. There you go. You have the picture of the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. And he says that this agreement could usher in a golden era in relations with India and Northern Europe, as both sides are deepening their cooperations in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, Arctic strategy, cybersecurity, defense technology, and advanced manufacturing. Analysts say that the move reflects a broader global shift towards strategic economic partnerships, is what we're seeing. Which is, in this case, is centered around clean technology, resilient supply chains, and geopolitical realignment when you have such tensions taking place with the global conflicts in certain regions. So now India and the 5 Nordic nations are Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. They have agreed to elevate relations into what they call the Green Technology Innovation Strategic Partnership. Now, this is important because it is not just a climate partnership. This deal also reflects a major strategic realignment on green energy, AI, defense, Arctic access, semiconductors, digital infrastructure, as well as industrial reliance. India is increasingly sees the Nordic region, such as those 5 countries, as a gateway to advanced technology, Arctic strategy, and European industrial partnerships. Now, the Nordic countries also see India as a massive growth market, a manufacturing hub, AI talent base, as well as a geopolitical counterweight in Asia when it comes to, if they're not doing this with China, then you have India as the option to that, is why it's, India seems as like the right partner in that geopolitical region. So according to some of the key factors on the cooperation, you have, the summit statements on partnership. They focused on renewable energy, green hydrogen, AI and digital technology, cybersecurity, telecoms, maritime systems, Arctic research, defense innovation, healthcare technologies, sustainability, and advanced manufacturing were all the key components on this agreement, whereas Prime Minister Modi specifically highlighted Iceland's geothermal expertise, Norway's Arctic and blue economy leadership, Sweden's advanced manufacturing and defense sector, Finland's telecom and digital systems, and Denmark's cyber and health technology sectors. Prime Minister Modi said that the bilateral trade between India and Nordic countries has increased roughly 4 times increased by 4 times in the past decade, while the Nordic investments into India have risen roughly 200%. So this partnership is built on India's recent European Free Trade Association agreements, the EU expansion, and the growing European industrial integrations that we've seen India do in the last little while. When it comes to Arctic strategy, it's becoming more important because of the Arctic cooperation. Of course, we're hearing the latest on US and Canada. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. We covered it yesterday. But, we know that there is increased activity in the Arctic when it comes to Russia, when it comes to China. So that's very important. And here you have this other key agreement taking place on Arctic cooperation. India has increasingly expanded its Arctic scientific research, their shipping interests, and their polar policy engagement. Meanwhile, the Nordic countries have, major influence in Arctic governance, icebreaker technology, maritime infrastructure, critical minerals, and polar research. So it is a very strategic partnership there. And analysts are saying that India's increasingly sees the Arctic routes and energy access as a strategic priority as global trade routes are shifting and climate change is accelerating, some of those shipping routes, and China is expanding its Arctic influence. And this is why you had President Trump talk about Greenland and wanting to purchase Greenland. So, all very critical things that you're seeing these moves being made by these world leaders. And when it comes to AI and AI technology, well, the competition is central to all of this, right? Because this partnership also reflects that global AI and semiconductor race where India wants a trusted telecom system, a digital infrastructure, AI development, manufacturing partnerships, and outside of the heavy dependence on China or the United States. And the Nordic countries offer the advanced innovation ecosystems, clean energy expertise. They've been at it for a lot longer in compared to India, and semiconductor when it comes to clean energy. And you have semiconductor research and industrial automation that the Nordic countries are offering. When it comes on to defense cooperation, that's also a thing where India and Sweden have also upgraded their ties into a broader strategic partnership, which covers defense, cybersecurity, emerging technology, and security cooperation. The shift comes at a time where you have this Ukraine war and Russia-Ukraine war going on since 2022. You have, rising NATO militarization. You have the Arctic tensions that, we've talked about, and the global supply chains that are being fragmented when it comes to oil and everything else. So now Europe is increasingly looking towards India. They're saying that they want the partnership because it reflects broader trends, because Europe is increasingly seeing India as a critical long-term and strategic partner. Why would that be? Well, because there is tensions with China. It still remains very high. Supply chains are fragmented if they want to have a secure partnership and make sure supply chains stay consistent. And this AI competition is accelerating. India has AI driven talent, and Europe wants a diversified industrial partnership that India can offer when it comes to its literal workforce. And so India is increasingly benefiting from this entire pushback from China on the China One policy, right? So you have China drawing red lines with the rest of the world when it comes to Taiwan. Taiwan saying we want to be a sovereign, independent country. Meanwhile, Taiwan is at the center of, semiconductor manufacturing and exports to the world. And so Taiwan is a very critical piece of that. And when it comes to Strait of Taiwan, you have 20% of shipping that goes through there. And then you have China saying, nope, all hands off on Taiwan because Taiwan is considered China's territory and because of the China One policy, which of course creates a tension when it comes to Europe and, other nations. And for that, well, this is what would be seen as this China One policy would make it seem as, Chinese manufacturing dominance. And so India looks like a lot more strategic partner to these Nordic countries in Europe, and Europe because of the EU trade agreements, and more so because of that. So you have, the climate and energy transition that's central to this agreement because it strongly emphasizes what would be clean energy, green hydrogen, sustainability, carbon reduction, and industrial decarbonization. Which is important to those northern European countries. And the Nordic countries are also global leaders in all of that, right? They're global leaders in renewable energy, carbon neutral infrastructure, electrification, and climate technology. And India, meanwhile, needs massive energy expansion, right? Because India's been hit with this conflict with Iran because it relied, on the oil supply out of the Strait of Hormuz, almost 60%. So you have now India looking at, other methods when it comes to its massive energy expansion to support its manufacturing growth, AI infrastructure, urbanization, and industrial scale. So you have all of this taking place, and that was a key factor of the India Nordic partnership that is more increasingly like a long-term industrial and geopolitical alignment. And you have this taking place, on day 80 now on this USA, Israel, Iran conflict, which we're now going to get to. So we've been talking about this conflict with Iran for like the last 2 months. So where are we at? Well, now I can say that Iran has stepped up a new proposal and has sent it to President Trump. Iran, some of the same stuff we've been talking about, right? It's demanding reparations. It wants sanction relief. It wants the US troops to pull back from the Iranian ports, allow Iran to trade. And this is all part of this new peace proposal, right? So Iran has outlined a sweeping new peace proposal to the United States, and it's demanding some of those major things, right? They're saying you started the war, you should pay for the damages, right? We're talking about trillions of dollars worth of damages to Iran and its infrastructure, saying that we want reparations for war damages. They're saying we want the American forces near Iran to withdraw because it's hurting the Iranian economy if it's not able to trade. They want sanctions relief to be able to get, billions of dollars that are tied up and have been withheld. They want that to be released back into Iran. And they're saying that they want to recognize Iran as a sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. And we know they've asked for this. They're saying, they've closed off the Strait of Hormuz in now 80 days since this conflict began. But in the last peace proposals that were going back and forth, having control of the Strait of Hormuz as like sovereignty over it is what Iran's been asking for. That has not been agreed on because there's no peace proposal that's been agreed on. But just a few days ago, you had Iran open up an X page, previously known as Twitter, which essentially is showing that, they're going to be the ones who have sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. And so this is very critical because shy of them being, agreed to this term, here I'm going to pull it up. It is the X page is called it's called the official account of Persian Gulf Strait Authority. We have a snapshot. This is a newly found X page that Iran has, put up. And essentially they're saying that, come on here to see what's going on when it comes to, so the Strait of Hormuz, to be able to travel through it. We can, if you can show it, that'd be great. We have this X page. And it says the Persian Gulf Strait Authority is the legal entity representative authority of the Islamic Republic of Iran for managing the passage and transit through the Strait of Hormuz. And then there it says, and this was just posted on May 18th, so yesterday. There you go. Go on full screen. Great, because I'm just reading it. Yeah. So then it says navigation within the introduced boundaries of the Strait of Hormuz, which were previously determined by the armed forces and authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran, is contingent upon full cooperation with these entities, and passage without permission will be, and that's been cut off. But essentially saying that you're going to have real-time updates about the Strait of Hormuz operations and the latest development, and essentially we're the authority. So shy of them having an agreement with President Trump on this matter and, coming up with the peace proposal, they have already launched their, X page. And, this, you could say a lot of Trump's policies or what he's going to do next, he posted on Truth Social. And so now you have Iran creating their own X page saying they're the authority over the Strait of Hormuz. If you want to know, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, come to this X page. So you have the same thing happening on both sides, but realistically, they don't have authority on the Strait of Hormuz, even though they have been able to close it up. And there's nothing Iraq, Saudi, UAE, Qatar, Oman, or any of those GCC countries are going to do anything about it so far on day 80. So this is where things are at now. President Trump, went on his Truth Social and he said he confirmed that he's going to postpone the planned military strike following the urgent pressure and pleas of the Gulf allies of the Gulf, GCC countries, saying that they need more time. So Qatar has come out saying that there needs to be more time. Please, it does feel like it's a stalemate, but allow more time for this negotiation to take place. Now, there is, diplomatic pushback. There are major gaps when it comes to what Washington's asking for, what Tehran is asking for, when it comes to Tehran's nuclear restrictions and all of that. And then you have the sanctions and you have the regional security, which is what the GCC countries are worried about. And then larger to that is the global markets and the energy traders that are watching this fragile ceasefire take place, right? So now Iran's proposal is detailed, right? It's detailed that for ending the war, that Iran and for a wider regional, crisis, essentially is asking of those specific things in the peace proposal. President Trump is saying that, he's going to look at this peace proposal and also hold back, even though he's saying time is ticking to Iran, that because you have Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, who essentially said, let's go the diplomatic route. Why? Because if things erupt again and President Trump decides to, seek military action on Iran, guess what Iran's going to do? Iran's going to attack Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all the same countries that have American military bases that are just over the Gulf, right? So to that, they're saying, okay, well, we've now been in what would be a ceasefire for about a month and a half, and even though the conflict is now ongoing for 80 days, let's come up with a diplomatic way to go forward. And so President Trump said that there's now a good chance in reaching a deal with Iran on its nuclear power. They're saying that the U.S. officials also described Iran's current proposal as insufficient, saying that, it doesn't have any of those criteria when it comes to the nuclear items on enrichment of uranium, what to do with the existing stockpiles of enriched uranium, dismantling the nuclear facilities, and all those things that U.S. has been pushing. A lot of analysts are saying that, it's really Israel pushing those things and it's being backed by the United States. To that, which is why President Trump said, if negotiations don't resume and if they fail, they're looking at military options, right? So again, Iran's core demands, according to Iranian state media, is that Tehran's proposal includes end of hostilities across the region, U.S. troops withdrawing from Iran completely, compensation for war destruction, reopening financial access for Iran to get its money back and have access to the markets, by lifting sanctions and release of those frozen Iranian assets, and to end the U.S. maritime blockade that is taking place in the Strait of Hormuz and on the Iranian ports. So Iran is demanding its recognition of the Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Even though it's demanding it, it already started its own X page saying, come here if you want to know the latest information. And that's a part of what Iran's asking. So now, Strait of Hormuz, we've talked about this, for the last 2 months. It's critical to keep remembering that it, has 20% of global oil supply. It normally passes that waterway. And the war and the blockade have disrupted tanker traffic. It has increased insurance costs, and now it's pushed oil today at over $110 per barrel. And it's reignited global inflation fears. We already saw the inflation numbers increase in Canada to 2.8%, in America 3.8%. So that's all part of, what we're seeing play out. Now, when it comes to US and Iran, they're still very far apart when it comes to this long-term restriction on uranium enrichment. United States saying 20 years, Iran is saying we can agree to 12. When it comes to tighter nuclear oversight, Iran is saying we will not dismantle our nuclear facilities. When it comes to limited missile capacities, and also specifically what to do with the enriched uranium, to which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says, you go and you take it. And I don't know how that would happen unless Iran agrees, because then we're talking about another level of war, and we're talking about another level of things escalating. So then you have Iran insisting that its nuclear program is tied to sovereignty, saying that the sanctions must end and that the military pressure must stop before major concessions are taking place. So Iran is saying, show us good faith and remove your presence in the Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz. Give us sanctions relief, give us some reparations, and then we'll come and talk about what we agree to do on the nuclear stuff and on the enriched uranium. To which the United States saying, no, we need to first talk about the nuclear aspect, nuclear program and weapons and enriched uranium before we remove all those things. So they're both coming from opposite ends on this negotiation. And to which you have Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE saying, let's try to mediate this and be a little bit more diplomatic about all of this, because of it's a whole regional impact, right? Like right now, UAE has left OPEC after 30 years. It left in the beginning of this month. Now it's going to produce as much it wants to and, price oil as it needs to. But just over the weekend, there was confirmed reports that there was 3 missile attacks towards the UAE. 2 were intercepted, and 1 hit near its nuclear facility. There have been threats in Saudi for its nuclear facility. So you have all of this happening at the same time. And so they're saying, hey, we used to be countries where the Western countries and the Eastern markets would come and invest, right? UAE was a place where businesses were investing and growing, and it was attracting foreign investors and expat community, which is larger than its own population. And now it's becoming a critical zone where it's not so safe to go to. And that's, investment dollars are leaving the Middle East and going to Hong Kong. So, which seems a lot more stable. Another plus for China, right, as all this is taking place. So you have some of this stuff, which now we're going to watch very closely to see what happens. What is President Trump going to come back with? Iran is saying that they're going to negotiate from a place of strength, that they're not going to be bullied into, terms that they don't agree on. The United States is saying, they're running out of time, and things could increase in terms of military pressure. Already, there's been reports that President Trump has already approved military options before the Gulf allies intervened. Essentially, the White House reportedly instructed the Pentagon, CENTCOM, which is in the region, and senior military leadership to remain prepared for rapid, large-scale strikes if negotiations fail. So we know that's at the same time happening. Trump has continued his public warning on Truth Social that Iran cannot obtain nuclear weapons and that he wants a negotiated settlement before launching another major operation, to which what's been consistent is that the Israeli prime minister is pushing ahead and saying that the region and Israel will not be safe unless the enriched uranium is removed. So that's a key contention part of what President Trump is pushing forward, to which Iran is not going to agree to. So we're watching this very closely when it comes to the implications of this conflict that is now on day 80. And to that, you have Lebanon and Syria are actually reshaping their relationship during this, situation that's taking place with Israeli forces attacking and trying to occupy southern Lebanon. This major geopolitical shift, which is really taking place in the Middle East. So now, after decades of what would be defined as Syrian dominance over Lebanon, you have officials in Beirut and Damascus now emphasizing sovereignty, border security, and economic cooperation, as both countries are facing growing regional instability linked to this Iran conflict and Israeli military operation that's taking place in Lebanon. The latest numbers on Lebanon is over 3,000 people have been killed with this Israeli occupation and military operation that's taking place in Lebanon, and over 9,000 people have been injured. Analysts say that, this is reflecting on a broader transformation of what is taking place in the Middle East in terms of alliances, in terms of, coming together during this unstable times with Iran and with what's happening with Israel. So when it comes to Lebanon and Syria, this is very interesting because this is after decades of tension and mistrust between the two countries that is now being reset, as you can see in that picture with the two leaders of Lebanon and Syria. They're resetting their relationship around sovereignty, border security, and regional survival, because you have Israeli attacks, you have the Iran war, you have the shifting Middle East alliances where you have UAE leaving OPEC after 50 years, and you have Saudi Arabia taking dominance in that entire region. And so there's a bit of clash. You have the relationship between Pakistan and Iran. You have the relationship with Iraq and Iran. So a lot of different moving parts that are taking place, and to that you have the biggest political shift between Beirut and Damascus in years. So what actually took place historically? Syrian forces remained inside Lebanon from 1976 until 2005. Damascus heavily shaped Lebanese politics, intelligence, and security, and armed groups. This era largely collapsed after the assassination of the former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005. It triggered the Cedar Revolution and Syria's military's withdrawal from Lebanon. And so now, after, since then, we're talking about since 2005, now both countries are trying to reset and redefine their relationship on more equal terms. Here you have, the recent meeting with the Lebanese Prime Minister in the photo there, Nafas Salam, and Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharar, focusing on sovereignty and some of those critical things when it comes to their borders, refugees, smuggling, prisoner issues, and more specifically, economic cooperation. So now the talks are reportedly part of a joint committee to address detainees, longstanding security disputes, and border management. This shift is happening. You have, this intensifying of Israeli military operations, even though they're supposed to be in a ceasefire for 45 days. It's still escalating with Israeli forces in southern Lebanon. And Israel has expanded its buffer zone. Essentially, they said they're going to seize Lebanon's land, about 10% of Lebanon's land. So that is part of what the Prime Minister of Israel has announced. And it is launching strikes into Lebanon and Syria. And it's not just in southern Lebanon, because Beirut has also been hit. There's been also increasingly targeted Hezbollah infrastructures, Iranian-linked routes, and border corridors. So you have this regional pressure that is forcing these two countries that were at odds now coming to the table to be able to coordinate closer. When it comes to Hezbollah's position inside of Lebanon is, there's reports that's also changing, because inside Lebanon, there's criticism of Hezbollah, right? That's increasingly has increased because Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. And essentially, this is what Israel is saying that they're fighting. They're fighting Hezbollah, to that Lebanon is saying, we don't want to be in this fight. And also, how do they push back on Israel increasing their borders and essentially trying to occupy southern Lebanon and pushing out. There's about 1.3 million Lebanese people who had to leave southern Lebanon because of this conflict. So you have the Lebanese political factions. They're arguing, they're saying that Hezbollah's actions have dragged Lebanon deeper into the Israel-Iran conflict dynamics, and which just impacts this refugee displacement in Lebanon. It is going to have an economic collapse, and there's of course, military instability. The Lebanese government has increasingly emphasized that they want state sovereignty over armed factions, and that, we know that the two sides, Israel and Lebanon, are supposed to sit down and carry on their conversations on both sides in Washington, D.C. But prior to that, we're seeing Syria and Lebanon step it up. So a lot of changes are taking place. And Damascus, Syria, is simultaneously trying to normalize its ties with Arab neighbors, and it wants to re-enter regional diplomacy and rebuild economically after years of war, right? So Syria increasingly wants their border stability, they want sanction relief, and they want trade access, and they want to be able to bring in money for reconstruction. And so it's critical because you have Lebanon and Syria's economy essentially as a logistic gateway to the Mediterranean. And that's why they're trying to be able to reintroduce it. Now, when it comes to one of the major issues with Syria and Lebanon is their refugee issue, right? So one of the biggest unresolved issues that remains is that there are Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Lebanon roughly hosts 1.5 million Syrian refugees, according to latest estimates by the UN, which places enormous strain on Lebanon when it comes to housing, infrastructure, healthcare, and the economy. And Lebanon increasingly wants a way to organize the refugees to now return back to their home in Syria. And they're saying that they need to do that with Syria. And this was part of the conversation that the two leaders had. And when it comes to Israel's attacks, that's of course adding more instability in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon and parts of Syria. So Lebanon's health minister said that more than 3,020 people have been killed since March, when the conflict began with Israel. And the mainly in southern Lebanon is as heavily damaged, it's militarized, and it's depopulated. The latest numbers also, it's about 9,000. Here, I have the latest numbers. It is 9,000, and where are my exact numbers? 9,200 wounded in Lebanon, and 3,020 that have been killed. Now, in this Middle East, it's, we're looking at massive issues here that are breaking apart, right? The old regional system is breaking apart because the Middle East is increasingly reorganizing around energy security, as this conflict with Iran has been, going on for more than 2 months. Proxy conflict when it comes to Hezbollah, for example, Israeli-Iran situation conflict, which has been really driving what's been taking place in the Middle East. And the Turkish influence is a factor. And you have the GCC countries, their diplomacy and their efforts to be able to rein this in because it affects the entire region. And you have, through back channels, you have China mediating some of these efforts, and through Pakistan when it comes to Iran. So that is a critical piece of all of this that are taking place right now. And so there's, increased diplomatic pressures on Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Israel to prevent a wider collapse that we're seeing in the energy markets, and inflation numbers that we're talking here in Canada about. So you can see how everything is interdependent on those factors. And to that, well, the Trump administration, we said this yesterday, was announced that it has reportedly withdrawn from the oldest Canada-U.S. defense institution because it is accusing Ottawa of failing to make credible progress on military spending commitments. So now the U.S. Has left the Permanent Joint Boards of Defense. This was a bilateral advisory body that was created in the Second World War, which helped shape, the defense cooperation between the two countries for decades. And this is coming at a time when there's Arctic tensions, there's, AI warfare, hypersonic missile threats, growing geopolitical rivalry between North American security, is in the forefront of what we're seeing in this Canada-US relation, this tension between Canada and the United States. So the United States is essentially saying that they're increasing pressure on Canada to modernize North America's joint defense system. And they're saying that this is critical. And to that, you have President Trump's administration leaving the Permanent Joint Board of Defense with Canada. That's huge because that is also putting pressure on Canada in a different way. And I think what's to come, given that the CUSMA renegotiation is just around the corner in about like 5 weeks, is that the pressure is going to be mounted on Canada. And this was just the first one, and it's probably going to increase in the next few weeks before this negotiation takes place. So this is a very critical time for Canada. The NORAD modernization, Canada says that it's pledging $38.6 billion over 20 years to modernize NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command. It includes a new Arctic radar systems, AI-enabled surveillance, satellite tracking, underwater sensors, and integrated missile warning systems. So you have that, but the US is saying thanks, but no thanks. It's not fast enough. It's not quick enough. It's not enough is what the United States is saying. So the bigger political tension here is the Canada-US strain, right? Trump continues to pressure Canada on defense spending, trade, Arctic strategy, and industrial policy. And, we know that Prime Minister Mark Carney is trying to at the same time diversify Canada economically away from reliance and dependence, more like not reliance, dependence on the United States, and strengthen its ties with Europe, Asia, and Indo-Pacific allies. But, United States takes 70% of Canadian exports, 90% of Canadian oil. So it's very hard. How do you replace that? How do you replace it even in a short period of time? How do you replace it in a long period of time? These are some things that we want the Prime Minister's, ideas on. It is true. Canada depends heavily on the United States. And so when you have this pressure mounting and now reports that they're not even talking, you have Mexico, who's on second round of talks with the United States, and Canada and US have not even had their first talk when it comes to CUSMA. That's really scary, right? So you have Canada's top trade negotiator. She's warning that there will be no quick resolution to the upcoming review of the Canada-US-Mexico Trade Agreement, CUSMA. Her name is Janice Charest. And she's saying that, hey, she's a top chief negotiator. Janice Charest, she says that the July 1st review deadline should be viewed as a checkpoint, not a cliff, saying that Ottawa expects prolonged and difficult talks over tariffs, industrial protections, and the North American supply chains, right? She's saying that, saying buckle up, pretty much, right? Which is what Prime Minister Mark Carney has been saying to us. If you recall, last month he launched his 8-minute video on his YouTube page. If you want to know what he's doing, he's kind of active on his YouTube page. I go on there every now and then to see what has he released. And we played it on here, but if you haven't seen it, go onto his YouTube page. There's an 8-minute video of his plans and really setting the bar low when it comes to the United States. So this agreement will be in large part when it comes to Canadian trade for, the tariffs, border restrictions, trade uncertainties, if it doesn't go as well. And without stability in CUSMA, well, Canada's looking at manufacturing issues. It's looking at, the auto industry, agriculture, energy, supply chains. Those are massive disruptions. So July 1st is the major deadline under this current agreement of Canada, US, Mexico. It is the 6-year joint review because this was done on July 1st, 2020. So now July 1st, 2026 is the 6-year mark for the review. And if the countries fail to extend the agreement, CUSMA does not immediately collapse, but it enters into an annual review cycle instead. So business groups fear this because if there's an annual review cycle, that means another 2 more years of President Trump's administration, but it also means that there's going to be uncertainty around everything. If you don't have certainty around what could be tariffed in terms of your industry or certain industries, then it's very critical, because what that does is, when it comes to private money, when it comes to investors, when it comes to business, well, that's going to freeze investment dollars. And when investment dollars get frozen, it freezes hiring, manufacturing expansions, and supply chain planning. So you have all of that. That is very critical. President Trump is arguing that the agreement is unfair, that Canada and Mexico have a trade deficit. They send more exports to the United States than the other way around. Well, 90% of Canadian energy goes to the United States, right, through a pipeline. So that is a big contributing factor, and they take it for below market rate. And then they refine it and they sell it to the markets. So there you have that. And but President Trump saying no, right? There was a trade deficit. And so that's why he started the tariffs, if you recall, on Canadian steel, aluminum, automotive parts, and other sectors. If you recall, it went as high as 50%. So a big part in this is that Canada's refusing full renegotiation, right? You have the chief negotiator, Janice Charest. She's saying that, Canada's mandate is to protect the core structure of CUSMA, not reopen the entire deal, right? She said that there will be no need for renegotiations. Essentially, it's just some key factors as a review, because it's hit the 6-year mark. And to that, Prime Minister Mark Carney is saying that the United States will not dictate the terms. So here you have it. Let's see what will take place. When will both sides start talking? Because Mexico is on round 2 of talks with Washington. Canada has not yet even begun formal negotiations. If you recall, the negotiations talks started, and then you had the ad by the Ontario government that was sent out on anti-tariffs by, essentially using President Reagan's voice on his views on tariffs. And that was played out in the United States, right? That was a lump sum that was invested to play that ad in the United States to, raise awareness and educate the Americans on this tariff situation that President Trump is pushing. To that, of course, President Trump was highly upset. And then the talks ended, and things just haven't been looking as great since then. So to that, you have Canada doing certain strategic things, like in terms of raising its partnerships with other countries. And, and so we're going to see what this means. We do have a little bit of time. I'm going to go into this latest story that we mentioned, which is about these 3 Toronto police officers who are off duty on vacation. Very huge thing that now they were arrested in Spain. And since they've come back, one of them has come back. They've essentially been arrested. They're waiting for 2 more. I'm going to tell you about this. So essentially, here's what's making the headlines, right? So you have 3 off-duty Toronto police officers. They're facing serious allegations in Spain after being arrested in connection with alleged sexual assault incident in Barcelona. The Spanish authorities say the case involved alleged assault on a sex worker in a taxi ride, where one officer, while these officers were vacationing in Barcelona. So the Toronto police confirmed that one officer has already been suspended from duty pending further legal proceedings. And so this allegations over sexual assault and assault of a sex worker while vacationing in Spain. This incident, the Spanish authorities said that this alleged incident occurred on May 13th. So we're talking about just a few days ago in Barcelona. And the Spanish police saying that according to the Catalonia's regional police force, they said that the officers were riding in a taxi with a sex worker. When one allegedly touched the woman inappropriately, she resisted, and the other allegedly struck her in the face. Spanish media reports say that the woman suffered injuries including a cut eyebrow. She required medical treatment and filed complaints alleging sexual assault and physical assault. Now, the arrests took place. Authorities say that 2 officers were arrested. This is the Toronto police officers who were off duty on vacation, not on any capacity from the police force in Toronto, but on their private time on vacation in Barcelona. So the authorities say that the 2 officers were arrested in Barcelona, and the third officer was later arrested in Palma de Mallorca 2 days later. Spanish police say that at least one officer faces sexual assault and injury charges, though details involve that other officers remain limited publicly. So, a spokesperson for the Toronto Police Services confirmed that the officers were off duty on vacation, not traveling on any official capacity. They did say that the allegations are serious and that the officer has already returned to Canada and has been suspended from duty. The other 2 officers are expected to be suspended upon their return in Canada. So these officers have not been publicly named. That's why we don't have names for you or any pictures for you. But authorities in Canada and Spain have not publicly released the names of these officers involved. So this is major because we know that this happened right after the massive case of corruption in Toronto Police Force, right? Which could set back trial proceedings, cases, going back with the corruption charges of opening up some of those cases that could lead to mistrial. So here you have now, on top of this corruption scandal that the Toronto Police Department's going through, now you have this massive situation of alleged sexual assault and physical assault. The allegations are coming at the same time as the broader public debate around police accountability, institutional culture in the Toronto Police Force, officer misconduct, and public trust in policing. In that we covered this quite extensively, the Toronto Police corruption case. You had York Region Police arresting Toronto police, active and non-active police officers. So it's pretty shocking to hear about this. Of course, as more information is released, we're going to bring you the latest. But before I go, there is a public health warning on a wave of ticks heading to Ontario this summer. I don't know if you've driven around and seen massive billboards. I have, near my home. Big billboard about ticks, so it's really important to cover this. Scientists are warning Ontario could see a major increase in tick population this spring and summer due to warmer weathers, expanding tick habitats, and changing climate conditions. Health experts are saying that the black-legged ticks, essentially, they are a primary carrier of Lyme disease that is now spreading further north across Ontario. We have a picture of the tick, just in case you're wondering how it looks like. The scientists say that, milder winters allow more ticks to survive. Well, we didn't have a mild winter, so that shouldn't be an issue. But when it comes to warmer temperatures, it extends the tick season. There you go. That's what a tick looks like. In case you're curious, if you see that, at least you know what it is. And ticks are increasingly being found in parks, trails, tall grass, suburban backyards, cottage region, and urban green spaces across Ontario. I know I'm saying this as the weather gets warm and it's nice to be outside, but this is important to know that Lyme disease is something that is something carried by these ticks, which can cause fatigue, fever, joint pain, neurological symptoms, heart complications, and long-term illness if untreated. So experts say that early treatment with antibiotics is usually effective. To delay diagnosis can lead to chronic complications for Lyme disease. So in this peak season, what health experts are saying is that, these are tiny little things. They're difficult to detect, but that's what they look like. But they're saying that what you could do is you could wear long sleeves and pants in wooded areas, right? Yes, it's hot outside, but if you're going to go for a hike in wooded trails, then just wear long sleeves that are at least breathable, because of the temperature. But when you're in trails, it's usually cooler because of the trees, and you want to wear pants, right? If you wear shorts, then you're exposing your skin to where they live, which is, in these wooded areas. Do use tick repellent. There's DEET. There's some other tick repellents, so start using that, of course. Avoid tall grasses. So if you see tall grasses, don't walk in it. And it's important to shower after outdoor activities. So you get home, shower, because then you're going to be in a better situation. And you could do a full body tick check. Ticks usually commonly attack around ankles, knees, wristbands, scalp, or behind the ears, right? So I'm going to say it again. It's your ankles, it's your knees, your waistband, not wristband. Your waistband, your scalp, and behind the ears. And the other thing is for pet owners. The vet is saying that essentially dogs are especially vulnerable because ticks can easily hide in their fur. So the vets are recommending that there should be tick prevention medication, regular brushing of dogs, and checking paws and ears of dogs and avoiding dense bushes when you're taking your dog out for a walk. So those are critical things. The areas that ticks are expanding across Canada are in Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and parts of Manitoba are seeing these longer tick seasons take place. So just be careful, and that's about it. But other than that, of course, let's enjoy the warm weather. Finally, it's here. And that's all the time we have on Ymedia Newsroom. I'm Ramona saying until tomorrow, take care and be well.